Hi guys, in this clip from our latest episode of Double Tap TV, we talk about the state of screen readers on Google and Microsoft.
The latest tech.
People love iPhone, and it's an important part of our daily lives.
Interviews.
You see far too many products that come on the market that you look at that you say, was a blind person ever even consulted for something like this?
Accessibility.
The most interesting thing over the last couple of years is the emphasis on gaming and accessibility.
This is Double Tap TV.
Hi and welcome to Double Tap TV. I am Stephen Scott.
And I am Marc Aflalo. Stephen, it's time to play a little game. We'll call it word association.
Oh, no, I hate games.
I'm going to give you two words, and I want your gut reaction, okay?
Okay.
Ready?
Yep.
Google and accessibility. Go.
Late to the party?
Oh, that's interesting because, we talk a lot about other companies like Apple on the show when it comes to accessibility, because I think that in the grand scheme of things in the major companies, they really do lead the pack when it comes to accessibility and the way they talk about it. I think Microsoft is definitely up there, of course. But Google, were they always as ahead of the game as it seems to be like they are now?
Well, I might seem a bit unfair to say late to the party, but here's why I think that. Because they were late to the party with hardware as well, if you think about it, right? Okay. So they were a bit later down the road with their smartphones, and then even later with computing experiences like the Chromebook. So that's why they're late to the party. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing. It does mean that, for example, accessibility on, say, a Chromebook, where you have Chrome Vox, which is a screen reader, is still in a lot of ways a baby compared to Microsoft's Narrator and Apple's VoiceOver. So I think, they are a little bit late to the party on it. That doesn't necessarily mean anything bad. In fact, it could be good in a lot of ways because they can learn from all the mistakes of all the others. I mean, look, I'll tell you, up until about 5 years ago, I wouldn't have touched Microsoft's Narrator with a barge pole. It was the screen reader that got you to the download page for every other screen reader. And Apple's VoiceOver to this day still has many, many problems. Chrome Vox is actually pretty decent as a screen reader, even though it's the baby of the pack. So late to the party is what I think, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
How much do you think it comes down to the fact that other companies, for example, Apple and Microsoft, make their own hardware? And therefore, they are working really hard to make sure that hardware is accessible to everybody. Whereas Google, I mean, other than the Pixel Buds and, the home speakers and stuff like that, which aren't as vastly popular, really aren't their focus. It's really the software. And then they're at the mercy of all these manufacturers who are doing different things and trying to use Android and layer on top of it, et cetera, et cetera. Does that have a big factor? Is that a major player or reason that they aren't necessarily right there with everybody else?
I think it does. I don't think it's much different for Microsoft, though. I mean, Microsoft are in the same boat. Yes, they do make the Surface lineup of products, but still they are reliant on Dell and HP and Acer and everyone else to come up with solutions to make great products using their software. And some might argue it's harder for Microsoft, actually, not just because of the fact that they have all these other third-party vendors to think about, but all the legacy they've still got to keep in their hardware. You and I have talked about this on our shows many times, where I've often thought it would be great if Microsoft could just rewrite Windows from the ground up. But actually the truth is they can't do that because there's so much legacy in there and so many systems around the world. In my country, in the UK, our nuclear defense system still runs on floppy disks. It's ridiculous, right? So you couldn't wipe out half of Microsoft. You'd wipe out our nuclear deterrent as well, and that's not ideal at the moment. So, I think when it comes to, Google was always a company focused on search, and they've done that, and they've been brilliant at that. In the hardware world, I don't think they've been quite as successful. I think the biggest problem with Google, in my view sometimes, is that it looks like they shelve projects very early. I mean, we've just learned recently about the Pixel book range of computers that's being scrapped, and not just that there won't be any more Pixel books, but the entire team has been disbanded that was involved in creating it. They're not going to be making hardware anymore. They're going to be focusing on the software. They're going to be focusing on delivering it to other companies like Lenovo, like Dell, who are coming up with amazing Chromebook devices. They don't need to be in the space. In some ways, I find it a shame that they've lost out on that. In other ways, I think it's actually quite a smart move. If someone else is doing it better, Why get in the middle of it? Why bother? You create the software. You do what Microsoft does. Create the software, let someone else do it. I feel Microsoft will go down that line eventually as well. Apple's different. Apple is totally different because it is end-to-end with Apple. The hardware, the software, everything clubs together. When it comes to accessibility, though, I think the same problem exists for all of them, because there are still issues where you get a fantastic new product or a fantastic new service or a great new feature and accessibility doesn't work with it. That's the same for Microsoft, it's the same for Apple, and it's the same for Google. So accessibility does tend to live outside the box, if I'm honest, in some ways, and it doesn't always fit in.
One of the things I find, especially when I look at Google and I look at them as a company and I think about accessibility, their forte has always been the data, the search data, the history, all that information. But not only just the textual data and the information, but it's also evolved into the machine learning and the ability to take a photo and determine what's in that photo. And that technology really is coming to the forefront of accessibility, because to be able to hold your phone up and identify objects on a screen, that's an incredible thing. And I think that's something that we're definitely going to get into on this week's episode. You know, a couple of years ago at TechShare Pro, I think it was, one of the first seasons here on Double Tap TV, you had the pleasure of sitting down with Google's head of accessibility, and guess what, Stephen? He's back.
That's right. Christopher Patno is the Senior Program Manager for Google's accessibility team. He is coming up. This is Double Tap TV.
You're watching Double Tap TV. Get involved. Follow us at Double Tap On Air or email us feedback@doubletaponair.com. Double Tap TV will be right back.
Thanks for watching Double Tap here on YouTube. If you're not already subscribed, please do that so you don't miss another video.